Hello, and welcome to the fourth and last video in the Problem Solving Tools series. We talked about the Pareto chart, which we gather data and summarize into the Pareto chart so that we can see what are the top issues we should work on with our limited resources to solve the most problems. We looked at an operations process chart, which is a 10,000-foot view, gives us activities, operations, and inspections. We looked at and talked about a flow process chart, which gives us more detail than an operations process chart, includes transportation, permanent and temporary storage, has distance traveled and time for each step, and the importance of having the summary information in the header, and that all of the tools, including the flow diagram, which is our last one here, are ways to summarize data. So we collect data, summarize it, so that it gives us a picture, a view to help us know where to go make improvements in the process. So a flow diagram is also known as a spaghetti diagram, and I've shown two different ones here, and really the second bullet is the one to focus on. So it doesn't provide as much detail as the flow process chart, but it does provide a visual so we can see the path of movement, and if paths are crossing a lot, or if there's a lot of movement in one area or another. So you can see here there's a lot of going back and forth, so that would be an area to look at. Here you can see there's a lot of going back and forth in movement. So it just gives us a nice visual of not just the list of operations and steps, but how the person or material, whichever one we're looking at, or equipment, is flowing through the organization. So again, spaghetti diagram is a different word for it, but just shows the path of movement. So it shows a nice visual. And all of these flow diagrams should be to scale. And you'll practice this when you practice the flow process chart in class. And I'm going to give you an example of one here from when I was in industry, and it was something that we looked at, so give you a view that it actually is looked at in industry. Okay, so the Mexicali factory that I worked in, and you can see this is the layout of the factory, and then the spaghetti diagram or flow diagram is going to appear right before your eyes. So you can see the red arrow moving. That is the path that the material moved through the factory before we made any improvements. So you can see already that there's probably some areas for improvement there, is we had a lot of movement there over on the right of the slide, going back and forth throughout. So we use this as the basis to go and do some other studies to see if we could reduce some of the transportation. There was a lot of issues other than just movement of material and time that went along with that. So there's the flow diagram, and that was the before. And then here's the flow diagram for the after. We reorganized into lean manufacturing lines. So we had each line represented a product family, and we'll talk about that more when we get to lean. But you can see here much more straightforward path for the material movement throughout the factory. So that's an example of a flow process diagram from when I was in industry. So you can see that they really are used in industry, as are all the tools that I've been talking to you about through these videos. So the other thing I wanted to wrap up with is where in our work study process, so here's our ShredItem, right? Select, record, examine, develop, evaluate, define, install, maintain, ShredItem. So where in the work study process, in the improvement process that we follow here in this class, where do these tools fall in? So they're not really part of the select because we've already selected an area for study, but it is a little bit of a loop here, right? We record data, summarize it into a Pareto chart, examine it, and then develop some opportunities, options for improvement. We record data into an operations process chart, which is the 10,000-foot view level. We examine what that data is telling us, how many inspections versus operations versus assemblies, and then develop alternatives to make improvements, etc. So we kind of go through with all of the tools. We record the data, we use the tool that we talked about to examine it, and then develop some opportunities, some options for improving that particular process. Then we would go on to evaluate which of the alternatives would be the best, and then go ahead and document and install and maintain. But the tools we use, we record the data, summarize it in the tool, appropriate tool to examine it, and then develop alternatives is the point of that. So relating it back to the work study process, the process improvement procedure that we follow in this class. And then finally, to wrap up, just a summary, we've talked about the Pareto chart, which helps us identify which of the many issues we should be working on to get the most problems resolved with the least amount of effort. We talked about the operations process chart, which is the 10,000-foot view showing operations, assemblies, inspections. We talked about the flow process chart, which is the more detailed version. It includes transportation delays. It includes actually the time that the material, person, or equipment, whichever one you're looking at, is at that particular step, the length traveled. It has a nice summary data in the header information, and then the flow diagram, also known as a spaghetti diagram. That's a good supplement to the flow process chart because it gives us a visual of how the material, person, or equipment is moving throughout the facility. So that concludes our problem-solving tools. And again, the Pareto chart you're going to have a lab activity around, and you'll learn how to build one in Excel. Operations process chart, you're going to have a homework assignment, and you'll also read up and learn about bill of material with that. Flow process chart and flow diagram, we're going to do an in-class activity where you're going to develop the as-is, the current flow process chart and flow diagram based on information provided, and then you'll evaluate and recommend some improvements, and then develop the to be, or the proposed flow process chart and flow diagram. All right, thank you.